The one crackles to life at 0600 hours. All hands, this is Admiral Ror. Weather reports indicate Category 4 hurricane tracking our position. All department heads prepare for emergency protocols. Lieutenant Willa Grant's eyes snap open in her rack. While 5,000 sailors scramble to emergency stations, she lies perfectly still, listening. Not to the announcements, not to the chaos in the corridors, to the ship itself. Because 12 years maintaining Apache helicopters in Afghanistan taught her something the Navy's million-dollar diagnostic systems couldn't learn. When metal starts talking, you better be listening. The USS Harrington was about to scream. Willa had felt it building for 3 days. A subtle vibration in the port turbine that didn't match the diagnostic readouts. Fluctuations in power distribution that computers dismissed as normal variants. The kind of mechanical whisper that human instinct recognizes as trouble brewing. She'd tried mentioning it to the ship's engineers during routine assessments. They'd smiled politely and explained their automated systems would catch any real problems. Their equipment was cutting edge. Their training was comprehensive. What could an Army helicopter mechanic possibly know about nuclear carrier propulsion? Now, as the first 30-foot swells started rolling in from the horizon, those same engineers were about to discover the difference between textbook confidence and survival instinct. The storm had appeared on satellite feeds 12 hours ago as a routine Atlantic disturbance. Weather models predicted it would track northeast, away from their course. Navigation computers calculated optimal speed adjustments. Everything according to protocol. Everything catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Commander Barnes stood at the bridge helm with the certainty of someone who'd never watched sophisticated equipment fail when lives hung in the balance. The storm was manageable. Their systems were superior. American naval engineering would prevail. Admiral Michael Ror remained silent during the morning briefing, but his eyes told a different story. 58 years old, gray at the temples, carrying himself with the lean efficiency of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions in places that didn't officially exist. He'd learned to trust combat instincts over impressive presentations. His instincts were screaming now. The first massive wave hit like a freight train made of pure violence. The bow climbed what felt like forever, then crashed down with enough force to rattle every rivet in the ship's frame. Emergency lighting flickered across half the vessel. Deep in the engineering spaces, metal began screaming against metal. Willa was already moving when general quarters sounded. She took the ladders 3 rungs at a time, muscle memory from years of emergency responses guiding her through passages where other sailors stumbled. The ship bucked like an animal trying to throw its rider, but she read its movements with instinctive understanding. By the time she reached the engineering bay, chaos had taken over. Half a dozen Navy technicians clustered around diagnostic panels that painted increasingly uncomfortable pictures. Warning lights blinked in patterns nobody wanted to interpret. Petty Officer Drexler paced behind the control station, panic creeping into his voice. "Has to be sensor delay," he muttered. "Load balancing software is reacting to stabilizer corrections. Protocols will sort it out." "They're fighting each other," Willa said quietly. The group turned. Some recognized the Army lieutenant who'd been haunting their spaces. Others wondered what she was doing in their domain. Drexler's voice carried just enough respect to avoid insubordination. "Ma'am?" Willa stepped forward, pointing at the main display. "Ballast Tank 3B is overcompensating for a trim issue that isn't actually trim. Your port turbine's running asynchronous a couple percentage points off baseline. Automated systems are trying to balance the torque difference with ballast adjustments." She paused, reading their faces. "Problem is, you're not dealing with a ballast issue. You're dealing with mechanical instability about to get amplified by weather. Every wave that hits will multiply that harmonic until the hull starts flexing against itself." Another tech frowned. "So it's software sync?" "No," Willa said, her voice carrying 12 years of diagnosing machines that lied when they were dying. "It's turbine shaft alignment, bearing wear, something physical. The computer thinks it's compensating, but it's making the problem worse." The ship lurched harder, and every man grabbed for something solid. Willa rode it like she'd been welded to the deck. That's what happens when metal starts talking and nobody's listening. She headed for the ladder, because now she wasn't just diagnosing the problem. She was going to find someone with authority to fix it before the Pacific Ocean finished what failing equipment had started. The next wave hit like nature's sledgehammer. Everything that came before was just the hurricane clearing its throat. Now it began speaking in earnest. and its voice shattered any illusion that the USS Harrington was too advanced to be humbled by weather. Emergency lighting kicked in across the ship. Somewhere below, metal screamed in voices no machine should make. Willa reached the bridge as everything changed. Gone was the casual confidence of routine operations. Voices carried real fear now. Officers faced the reality of keeping 5,000 souls alive in conditions that made their training look optimistic. Through reinforced windows, the ocean had transformed into something alien. Waves the size of buildings marched toward them in endless procession. Rain attacked horizontally, driven by winds that treated the massive carrier like a cork. Admiral Ror's voice cut through electronic chaos with authority that made junior officers stop and listen. Get me real numbers on turbine output, not what computers think of what's actually happening. Engineering reports painted increasingly dire pictures. Port turbine overheating, power distribution fluctuating wildly, automated systems fighting each other as they tried to compensate for problems they couldn't properly diagnose. Willa stepped through the bridge hatch without invitation. Barnes turned, sweat beading despite full air conditioning. Sir, she's not bridge personnel. She doesn't have clearance. She's the only person on this ship. Admiral Ror interrupted without raising his voice. Who felt this problem before our diagnostics did? The words hit like a physical force. Every officer within earshot turned to stare at the Army lieutenant who had just been handed responsibility for a nuclear aircraft carrier's survival. A lieutenant commander from Combat Information Center stepped forward, indignation barely controlled. Admiral, we have qualified damage control personnel. Trained officers won't miss to turbine misalignment building for weeks. Cut him off. Who trusted computer diagnostics over mechanical instinct? Who would have sailed us blind into this hurricane? Another massive wave crashed over the bow. The carrier shuddered from stem to stern, and somewhere in its steel bones, another system pushed past design limits. Willa moved to the central console, scanning displays with systematic precision. Turbine output graphs looked like earthquake readings of wild oscillations. Speaking of metal under stress no engineer had planned for. You're fighting the hurricane with computers, she said, voice cutting through ambient chaos. The ship knows what it needs to do. You just have to let it. Barnes started to object, but Admiral Ror's look silenced him. Manual ballast control, Willa ordered. Disengage auto trim. Kill that harmonic compensator before it shakes us apart. The next hour became a dance with death. Waves the size of apartment buildings tested the Harrington's will to survive. Each mountain of water carried enough energy to snap lesser vessels in half. The carrier climbed each liquid peak like a steel cathedral ascending toward heaven, then plunged into valleys deep enough to swallow city blocks. Through it all, Willa stood at the control console like she'd been born there. Her hands moved constantly, adjusting trim, rerouting power, compensating for stresses that threatened to tear the ship apart from within. She didn't fight the hurricane, she danced with it, reading its rhythm and finding spaces between beats where survival was possible. Port ballast reduced by 4%, she called out, voice steady despite surrounding chaos. Don't try to keep us level. Let her roll with wave patterns. Fighting it transfers stress to hull structure. A junior officer manning ballast controls looked to Barnes for confirmation. Do it, Admiral Ror ordered. The ship responded immediately, rolling farther into the next wave but absorbing its energy instead of fighting it. Violent shuddering that had been building for 20 minutes eased to something merely uncomfortable. Another alarm shrieked, a turbine temperature spiking beyond safe parameters. She's running hot, Engineering Watch reported, voice tight with concern. Let her run hot, Willa replied without looking up. We're not cruising anymore. We're punching through. Back off throttle now and we stall inside the storm wall. Barnes found his voice. That's not procedure. You're risking turbine failure. We already have turbine failure. Willa cut him off, eyes never leaving readouts that told the story of metal pushed beyond limits. Question is whether we nurse it through or let it die. Following manuals written for calm weather, electrical systems began overloading. Sparks erupted from control panels as surge protection failed. Fire suppression systems couldn't respond fast enough to multiple failures happening simultaneously. Manual suppression, Willa ordered calmly, attention focused on keeping the ship stable as another massive wave threatened to roll them past breaking point. Reroute power through auxiliary grid. Main system can't handle load fluctuations. Barnes stared at her. How did you Afghanistan? She replied, adjusting trim to compensate for electrical systems' reduced capacity. Generators pushed beyond spec during mortar attacks. Same physics, different platform. Sparks died as damage control teams implemented her instructions. Lights steadied. Navigation systems stopped flickering. For the first time in 30 minutes, survival felt possible. Admiral Ror moved to stand beside her, close enough to speak without shouting over the Hurricane's voice. How long? Willa read patterns and data streams, feeling the ship's distress through deck plating beneath her feet. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if the turbine holds together. She didn't need to finish. Everyone understood the mathematics of catastrophic failure at sea. For another 20 minutes, they rode disaster's edge. Willa's quiet commands were the only thing standing between 5,000 American sailors and headlines that would change naval history. Each wave tested structural integrity. Each gust threatened to push systems beyond the point where engineering became wishful thinking. Then, like a curtain lifting, violence ended. Wind died to something merely dangerous. Waves dropped from mountainous to merely terrifying. Through cloud breaks, stars appeared like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The USS Harrington coasted into calm water with dignity of a warship that had looked hell in the eye and refused to blink. All stations report status, Admiral Ror commanded. One by one, departments checked in. Damage minimal. Bent steel, blown fuses, systems pushed beyond limits but functional. No casualties. No major structural failure. They'd punched through weather that should have sent them to the bottom because someone had listened when the ship tried to tell them how to survive. Barnes approached Willa, face mapping conflicted emotions. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology." Willa looked at him with eyes holding no anger, no triumph. "You don't owe me anything. You just needed someone who spoke the language." Admiral Ror gestured toward the flight deck. "Walk with me." They stepped into air tasting of salt and survival. Above them, stars wheeled impossibly bright after hours of storm-driven darkness. The flight deck stretched ahead like a steel prairie wet from spray but intact. Halfway across the deck, Admiral Ror stopped and came to attention, rendering a salute crisp and formal, carrying weight of recognition that transcended rank and service branch. Willa returned it with equal precision. Two professionals acknowledging competence demonstrated when everything else failed. "Outstanding seamanship, Lieutenant. Just listening to what she was trying to tell us, sir." The next morning brought calm seas and stories spreading through the sheep of the Army lieutenant who'd talked them through weather that should have written their obituary. In mess halls where she'd been dismissed, sailors now nodded when she passed. Not with exaggerated deference, but with quiet acknowledgement professionals gave to competence proven under pressure. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who'd spent weeks ignoring her recommendations, now sought her input. Technicians who'd questioned her qualifications listened carefully when she pointed out problems. Petty Officer Drexler approached her during morning inspection, voice carrying humility absent before the storm. "Ma'am, about that turbine realignment we ran diagnostics again and you were right about bearing wear." "How did you know?" "Just from vibration patterns." Willa looked up from maintenance logs. 12 years listening to machines complain. They all speak the same language once you learn to hear it. The two sailors who joked about her qualifications found themselves on turbine maintenance detail, learning exactly how much they didn't know about keeping ships running in impossible conditions. Seaman Rodriguez approached her after his first engine room shift. "Lieutenant, I wanted to apologize for comments when you first came aboard. I didn't understand what you brought to the table." "What changed your mind?" Rodriguez glanced toward the turbine bay where massive machinery hummed with steady rhythm. "Chief explained what you did during the hurricane, how you read failure patterns before computers did. Made me realize there's difference between knowing manuals and understanding machines." Lieutenant Willa Grant returned to her routine technical assessments, maintenance reports, keeping complex machinery functioning in conditions designed to break anything human-made. But now, when alarms sounded, officers looked for her input. When systems misbehaved, someone always asked what the ship was trying to tell them, because they'd learned what warriors have always known: a true expertise whispers while ignorance shouts, and sometimes the quietest voice carries knowledge everyone needs to survive. The person they tried to sideline became exactly who saved everyone. When metal screams and lives hang in balance, expertise doesn't announce itself with rank or recognition. It simply does what needs doing, quietly and completely, until crisis passes and survival becomes possible. The Army mechanic they said didn't belong became the reason 5,000 sailors made it home.